Okay, so we reviewed sections 4.1 and 4.2, which is probably the majority of the test. That's a little bit more than half. We did that already. And then we had just a couple more questions to do from 4.3 and 4.4. So this is the 4.3, the part about converting functions from one form to another. So if we want to convert to vertex form, right, this is standard form, isn't it? Right? When we want to convert things to vertex form, the easiest way to do it, remember, is we just want to be able to, we're starting off with the vertex form template, and we want to just plug in values for the numbers a, h, and k. That's it, right? So starting with standard form, what are the values? That's ax squared plus bx plus c, right? So what are the values of a, b, and c? And we don't even really need c, right? We just need a and b. So we already have one of the numbers to plug in. We already know that a is 2, right? Now we got to find h and k. Grady, what's our formula for calculating h? Do you remember? In terms of a's and b's. Anybody remember?
Oh, it's
Go ahead, Lee.
It's the negative.
There you go. Negative b over 2a. And so that's going to give us positive 20 over 2 times 2 is 4. So what do we get? 5. Okay, so then 5 is the number we're plugging in for h, right? And then finally, how do I always calculate k? Plug it back in, right? K is always going to be f of h. So that's going to be, I'm going to use my function up here. That's going to give me 2 times 5 squared minus 20 times 5, right? Because I'm just plugging 5 into my function, plus 69. So let me ask you a question. Do I square the 5 first, or do I multiply by 2 first and then square? Square the 5 first, because I'm doing PEMDAS, right? We do exponents to form multiplication. So that's going to give me 2 times 25 minus 100 plus 69. So that's 50 minus 100 plus 69. So that's going to give me negative 50 plus 69 is what? Negative 50. 19, there you go. So then 19 is the number I'm plugging in for k, right? And then all I've got to do is just plug those numbers in. And my answer would be 2 times x minus 5. What if I were subtracting a negative? That'd make that a plus, wouldn't it? Squared plus 19. So there's my answer. Okay? Next one, whenever we're going into standard form, sometimes people call it general form, but we're calling it standard form. Whenever I'm putting stuff into standard form, remember that's just PEMDAS. Standard form is simplified form. You know, we used to have the x squared terms plus the x terms plus the constant. So we're just going to follow our regular old PEMDAS to do this. Okay, and we're just simplifying. So what's the first thing? Inside parentheses, x plus 1. Can I do anything with that? Nope, can't. So that one we can skip. Step 1, exponents. Is there anything I need to simplify there? Any exponents? There's an exponent, right? 2. Well, what's being squared? X plus 1. Okay, so all that stuff in the blue box is what I've got to simplify. I have to square that out. That's what the exponent step is. So x plus 1 squared is the same as x plus 1 times x plus 1, right? If I distribute the x, that just gives me x squared plus 1 times x, right? And if I distribute the 1, that's giving me another x plus 1. And if I combine those like terms, isn't that just x squared plus 2x plus 1? So everything in the blue box is getting replaced with x squared plus 2x plus 1. I have to multiply 2 times the entire blue box, though. So what do I need to do? Put it in parentheses, okay? So 2 times that whole quantity plus 14. So there's step 1. Now what? Step 2. What am I going to do for step 2? Multiply, divide. You see any multiplication there? 2. 2 is being multiplied by that whole quantity, so that means I have to distribute to all the parts. So 2x squared plus 4x plus 2 plus 14. Finally, we get down to addition, subtraction. What's the obvious addition? 14 and 2. Right, so we end up with 2x squared plus 4x plus 16. Okay? We just simplify it. That's all it is. Standard form is just simplified form. I'm not going to do this one, but if I were going to, what would I do? Well, I have 3 things I'm multiplying. -3 times this factor times that factor. I would FOIL out those 2 first and get an answer, right? And then once I get an answer, just distribute -3 through and I'd be done. Okay? Questions? Okay. So if we are graphing a function that's in factored form, right? So first of all, if I want to find the x-intercepts, those are just the zeros, aren't they? Right? So I would just, to find the zeros, I would just set the function equal to 0 and solve. It's already factored. When are -1/2 times x minus 6 times x minus 10 all equal to 0? When I multiply by 0, right? What's the value of x that would make that factor 0? 6. How about the ones that would make that factor 0? So I know I've got zeros, which are x-intercepts, at 6 and 10. And the other way to think about that would be we could just compare this to factored form. Which is just a times x minus p times x minus q, right? What are the meaning of p and q here in factored form? Where are they?
Those are the zeros?
The zeros, or the x-intercepts, right? So those are just, we know that p and q are just the x-intercepts of the function. So we can see right away that the x-intercepts, p is 6 and q is 10. Okay, so there's two points. I need one more to get the parabola though. I need the vertex. How do I find h? H is the x-coordinate of the vertex, right? Say it again.
P plus Q.
There you go. Good. I'm averaging the x-intercepts, aren't I? So it's got to be halfway in between. That's how I find the middle numbers. I average. So h is always going to be the sum of p and q divided by 2 to average them. That's giving me, what, 16 over 2, which is 8, right? So, and that makes sense, doesn't it? H is equal to 8. Well, isn't 8 the middle value between those two x-intercepts? And we know it's got folding symmetry, right? So then how would I find k? How do I always find k? Plug it back in. K is going to be f of 8, right? So here's my function. All I got to do is plug in 8. So f of 8 equals -1/2. What's 8 minus 6? 2. What's 8 minus 10? Okay, so I get -1/2 times 2 is -1. -1 times -2 is -1 times -2. 2, yeah. So f of 8 equals 2. So my vertex then is at 8, 2. Okay, so over 8 up 2, there it is. And now all I've got to do is just connect and extend. And those, the locations of those 3 points would give away the parabola. Okay, questions? Okay. Okay, last couple are just solving. So these are the kinds, though, where I don't have to do anything fancy. I don't have to factor or do anything like that. Look, I've got a single x that I can point to, so I should be able to isolate it, right? So these are just reverse PEMDAS questions. What are the steps to get x by itself? Add 28 first. Which gives me negative 4x squared equals negative 392. Now what? Divide by negative 4. So x squared would equal, negative over negative is positive, right? 4 goes into 39 how many times evenly? 9, good. 9 times 4 is 36, so there's 3 left over, right? 3 remaining. 4 goes into 32 8 times. There you go. So x squared equals 98. We're getting there. Now what's the next step? Square root. So if I square root both sides to solve the equation, that's good. That's giving me an x equals, square root of 98 can be simplified, but if I square root both sides, what do I immediately have to include? Plus or minus, there we go. So I know I'm getting plus or minus the square root of 98. And if we do a factor tree for 98, what should I split that into probably? It's really good to see if I can get a perfect square factor. There you go. So 2 and 49. 2 is prime, so that's done. 49 breaks up into, okay, look, so we get a couple of 7s and a single 2, right? So I get plus or minus, what goes inside? The singles. Good, singles stay in. So I get a 2 inside, what goes outside? Doubles go out, right? So I get a couple of 7s. And there are my 2 answers, plus or minus 7 radical 2. So in Moodle, I'd have to enter those separately. I'd get 7 radical 2, comma, negative 7 radical 2. Okay? What about this one? Same thing, just a little more practice. Add 45.
5 by negative 5. Square root. It's done, okay.
So I cancel those guys, I get negative 5x squared equals negative 9. Divide by negative 5. Okay, so that cancels those guys, I get x squared equals 9/5. Now what? Square root. So the square root cancels the square, that's good. So I end up with x equals, now can I reduce 9/5?
No.
I can't. So then what do I do? If I want to simplify that, then I'm going to write it as separate square roots. I've got the square root of 9 over the square root of 5. I want to simplify the top and the bottom. What's the top simplified to? What's the top simplified to?
Very top.
3. And the bottom is already simplified. Okay, but I can't have it, no tens in the basement. Right, so now I've still got a radical. After I simplified the top and the bottom, I'm still stuck with a stranded radical on the bottom. So what is my strategy to get rid of that? Multiply top and bottom by square root of 5, right? And the reason for that is, when I multiply something by itself, it's like squaring. And that cancels the radical, doesn't it? So on the bottom, I'm just getting a 5. And on the top, I'm getting a 3 radical 5, which I can't do anything with. That's already simplified. And so those are my answers. I'm getting my plus or minus 3 radical 5 over 5. Okay, last one. Really good. This actually, this looks hard, but I made these work out nicely, even on the test. So what are the steps to fix this? So I'm going to add 2. I'm trying to get that x by itself, right? So I add 2. That gives me 2 times the quantity 4x minus 4 squared equals 8. Now what?
Then you do the multiplication.
No,
No, divide by two.
divide by
Oh,
2, because I'm trying to undo multiplying by 2. I can't distribute because that's being squared. So that gives me 4x minus 4 quantity squared equals 4. Now what?
Square root.
Square root cancels the squared. So 4x minus 4 equals, if I square root both sides, I always need a plus or minus. And the square root of 4 is just 2, right? So now, last couple steps.
Add 4.
Good, I'm gonna add it in front of the plus or minus, all right. So we could add the 4 there,
Divide by 4.
and then I just divide by 4 and I'm done. If I divide by 4, both sides, look what I get. X equals 4 plus or minus 2 over 4. So all we have to do is figure out what the plus sign gives us and what the minus sign gives us. Plus sign is x equals 4 plus 2 is 6 over 4, which reduces to 3 over 2. If I take the minus, I get x equals 4 minus 2, which is 2 over 4, which reduces to, voila, there are my two answers. Okay? All right, test tomorrow.